figured I'd jump right into this JLU refresh here on this original build of mine. I guess this is the 0.0 JLU, if you will. So I've got the mudslingers fitted onto the Kinetic gravy bowl rims. So those are on the Millstone Max weights / hexes. So those give it a +5 millimeter on each side. So that's a 10 millimeter track width increase. So then I've got the full send +6 axles here. 2 sets of fronts because I'm going to put on a rear steer. So I've got a fully assembled axle, which normally you would just throw on there, but I'm going to have to tear it apart since I'm putting on longer axle stubs. I'm going to swap in my rubber sealed bearings from this. I'm going to put on the brass diff cover, and then I'll put on the servo and the Emax tray. So I'll do a little bit of work to that back axle before I throw it on. So that should get us, and then I'm going to add these spare weights here, 15s to the front and 5s to the back. So that should get the track width out an additional 6 on each side. So that would be 11 per side, so 22 millimeter increase overall. So that ought to set this pretty wide, which is what I want to clear these tires. So you can see there we've already got kind of the typical wide stance, so add another 6 to that on each side. So that ought to be pretty nice and give us good clearance in the rear for that steering as well. So let me jump in and get at this. Hopefully this will go smoothly. These full send come with O-rings as well as the sleeve spacers. I guess one rolled over here. So I don't think I'll use the spacers since I've got the weights, and I don't know about the O-rings. I've never seen those before on any of these axles. Of course, there's no instructions, so I'll just dive in and see if I need those. I'm assuming those just take up more slack to that spacer. So I've got my own set of spacers I can use if I need additional to these weights. So I've got a little spare time here. Inclement weather, so definitely no painting today. So I figured let me go ahead and get the chassis going. Alright, got the front axle in. Everything went really easily. I've got the 15 gram GPM weights installed backwards, so the conical edge is towards the knuckle. And then, like on the other build, I had to shave off, not the whole spacer coming off the back, but basically took off the cylindrical section all the way down to where it begins to become conical there. And then the other spacer is, I left that alone. That's the back of the Millstone Max. And then the Millstone Hex extension is inserted into that as well. So got a lot of weight up front on this axle. You can see the width here compared to the rear. And I think this is going to be the ticket to get clearance here. Definitely got it in the front. Well, we may even still get into the back side of the tire there, it looks like. So may still be adjusting these fenders. Maybe I should have gotten the +10 millimeter axles that Full Send makes now and added these Millstone Maxes to that. That would have been 15 per side. So this is 11 right here. But it's looking good so far. Let's turn it on and make sure there's no binding with those Full Send axles. They have such a deep drive cup that I believe that's why you get the O-rings. If there's any slop and they push inward, I think you'd get binding. I'm not seeing any bucking. Sorry, I'm one-handed here. I'm trying not to go off the table. So that all seems pretty smooth to me. All right, so moving on, I guess, to the rear steer axle and get those guys extended and see what, if, and how much clearance, problems we're going to have back here and what we're going to need to trim. But man, so far it's looking pretty sick. It's definitely wide. It's all the way outside the fenders there. I mean, those are trimmed a little. Even if they weren't, though, I think they'd be outside the fenders fully. So another thing, maybe without these fully compressed kind of shocks, maybe if I swap out to some shocks that actually have a little preload and spring tension in them, maybe I can adjust back to the medium springs on these and get some lift, and maybe that'll help this. But you think really on compression, if they're full compression, it's not going to change anything. If we're turned, well, truck's on, I can't turn it, but if we're turned and we compress, we test. All right, moving along. All right, quick update on the progress here. Pulled this front axle apart that I'm putting in to swap the bearings in, and I was going to swap the trill diff and just basically put in the gears I had in there, just swap everything in and take out the new stuff and just keep the axle housing, basically that, and then the inner axle pieces. I guess I've already slid back in here. So in doing that, I found the major difference here in this pre-assembled metal China axle. It's the diff cover and the mating piece, I guess, in the axle housing around the bearings. So the trill diff would not fully seat, and if you look at that bearing retainer, see if I can focus on it. There we go. You get that hard edge there, kind of a half circle, hard edge. So that cannot find a home to seat in the off-brand axle. So on each side of those bearings, it's a little different there. It doesn't allow it to nest in there. So I'll show you the diff it came with. You see how it doesn't have those extensions, it's kind of just flattened off there. So kind of forces you to use this diff cover or grind off these little pieces, but I'm not going to grind off this precision trill diff cover. I'm just going to save it, use it on something else. Since this is the rear, I'm just going to add the other millstone spacers to this. I've got the max on the front, so I'm going to put the max on the back, so I've got more weight at the wheels and I'll lose the weight there at the diff. I did pull out all these other diff covers, so a bunch of no-name aluminum housings, but they all have the hard edge. And then I've got one hot racing diff cover, and of course it's got the hard edge. So the typical is that precision machine kind of hard edge semicircle bearing retainer. So other than that, this so far looks fine. Pulled out the bearings and I'll just save those for replacements. So I've got these rubber Fast Eddie's rubber sealed bearings to put in there. There were no little O-rings in the drive cups, and there were no O-rings on either side of the worm gear. I don't believe, or maybe just, was it on one side? Nothing. Okay, so it had it on one side. Had it on kind of the non-drive side. Yeah, there's not one there. It's so hard to tell. There's a little black one there. but no O-rings in the drive cups. So just something to know about this little guy. So I'm going to keep pushing along, get this thing reassembled. Well, having some issues here with this. I don't know if it's the axle. I'm thinking it's more of the full send stubs. I've been taking things apart and comparing stock to the stuff I bought and the full send. So here's the stock drive axle versus full send. I think that extra length is hitting the axle sooner, so I'm not getting as much turn. I think that stock slot is just kind of worn. That's why it's a little wider. Let me get the bottoms here kind of lined up. But I think the big difference is if you look in the inside edge of this stock cup, there's a nice bevel. So it allows it to turn further on that axle because of that bevel. You can kind of see it there on the right hand one. So the full send really doesn't have a bevel. It's just kind of a hard edge, so that hits again sooner. So I think I'm going to have to just take the depth of this cup down. I don't see any reason for it to be so deep. I mean, the only thing that does is hit the axle sooner and stop you from turning. You know, I swapped knuckles on and off, I swapped axles, I swapped inner axles, I looked at the pin length, you know, on the stock versus the ones that came in this China axle. You know, the knuckles, the Trill are fatter, but I don't see any difference like internally and how they mount or any dimensional differences as far as between the axles or anything. So you know, again, nobody can make a drop-in freaking axle that works without binding. Apparently Axial is the only one that knows how to make a freaking stub axle. If Axial will just come out with some extended ones, that would be great. So anyways, always issues. Aftermarket items with other aftermarket items with other it just snowballs. So I'm gonna keep at this and hopefully get this back together and no binding and a good turning radius. All right, that's looking a little bit better than it did last time. Got it bolted back together. Don't have it connected to the chassis yet. Don't have a way to test it all until I get the new ESC in there. It can run the crawler mode steering, but just looking at it, I think my steering is pretty good, pretty even both ways. I didn't modify the full send axles on the front. They seem to be turning fine. I did shave them down to the depth of the stock cup on the rear to get more articulation here in the turn. So I'm not exactly sure what the difference was there, but did have to modify for the rear. And then I used an M3 spacer by 2mm, and then I sanded that down. So that's probably about a 1.5mm spacer there. So that's all nice and snug. So that axle, there's no slop in and out. Ended up putting the O-rings in the drive cups on all the full send axles. Got the Emax hot racing tray in there, and that was something they didn't want to thread in. These top diff bolts were really kind of little tight going in. They threaded in, but I took it out 4 or 5 times, and you know, I didn't want to strip it. I threaded it just into the hot racing, and that was smooth as butter. And then so there was a little of alignment issue on this housing. So you know, all in all, I don't know if I'd recommend one of these housings. I mean, it is a good value for, like, I think this was 30 bucks or less, but you get everything. But of course, that took most of it out. So I may have been better off just buying you know, a trusted axle. But always looking to try the latest thing and see what it's all about, especially when there's such a cost break. So anyways, this weight wise, I think this will be fine with the hot racing axle weights added, and the Millstone Max is back here since I took off this middle diff. But next thing is to get it bolted back together and then get some brains in there so I can actually drive it and steer it and kind of test that four-wheel steer here and see how that all works. But there's progress. It's looking a little blingy on the back. Definitely lets you know it has rear steer. So anyways, that's where we are right now. I got this guy put back together, and in lieu of putting in all new electronics to test the four-wheel steer, I just plugged up the servo and to the rear and unplugged the front just to give me a test. And then you can see I've got it up on a block here, just kind of looking at maybe potential suspension lift here, some different shocks. Got a bumper already for the rear. It's pretty wide, so I may get rub there. I definitely am getting rub all over the fender in the back. That would have to come completely off. And the front, there's a lot of rub as well. So these shocks just basically belly drag it. They're on the very light pressure springs. So I think some shocks maybe in this guy's future here. Look at that, boom. But yeah, you can hear it getting into the body. Right there, gets into the back pretty easy. But this thing is super wide, really cool. I can't wait to get all the electronics hooked in and do the four-wheel steer, but I think I'm gonna stop here for tonight, and I think this is a good stopping point. Got the axles on, got the wide track in. I feel like I've got most of my issues solved except for the trail bind. There it is. Oh well, we'll readdress that later outside on the dirt. And I can always get rid of that overdrive once I upgrade the motor. I don't know that it's going to be needed with that kind of torque and with these tires. But we'll see. So I think that does it for this segment of the build. And stay tuned for more to come. Thanks for watching.